Joined now by the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, the co-host of the Bob McCown podcast. And John, Shannon, I was today years old when I learned that if you're in Quebec, you get every game in the NHL in your own language.
Pretty well. Yeah. The national deal, that 12-year deal we always talk about with Rogers is also a 12-year deal for TVA and their sports channel. And they can basically pick and choose whatever game they want other than the 62 games that are regional in Montreal for the Canadians on RDS. So
yeah,
they have, and they are a very talented group of people that have been doing off-tube voicing for years and years and years.
Yes.
So, pick the game you like. What's the best game? For years past, it's always been Pittsburgh because there's a real affinity for Crosby because of his play in Rimouski. Colorado for Pierre Lacroix and Patrick Waugh. And they just go and find the best games, and their market can see them on a regular basis.
And we ask you that because the first Connor versus Connor tonight, McDavid versus Bedard.
Yeah.
And it's not available nationally in English across Canada.
And I don't want to hear anything from
ESPN.
people. You could get center ice. This game is beyond center ice. This is of national interest.
So it is on Sportsnet Plus.
Again, yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. No, it's not. I'm not privy to what the discussions were, but there are quotas that each team is allowed to take national. There's quotas that Sportsnet's allowed to take national, and they've elected on this night to actually do the Vegas-Calgary game nationally on Sportsnet 1, and the Chicago-Edmonton game is on Sportsnet West.
Wow!
So there is a national.
By the way,
tonight.
it is on ESPN in the United States.
Yes,
with our pal Ray Ferraro.
So the national body in the national rights holder in the States saw, hey, maybe we should televise that game, but not the national rights holder in Canada.
Yeah, I don't have any explanation. I don't have any reason other than you have to. As the year goes on, you have to have as many Calgary games as Edmonton games national, and this probably fit into the matrix easier for them. I don't know.
Yeah. Moving right along, sir, we got Nikita Kucherov here in town Tuesday night, Rogers Arena. He leads the National Hockey League scoring race by 7 points in advance of Vancouver's JT Miller, Pettersson at 37, Hughes at 36. We're wondering if any of the Canucks are going to catch Kucherov. What do you think? Is he gone?
Well, I think he's gone. I really do. And I think in the end, the race will be between Kucherov and Connor McDavid. And the reason for that is that Tampa doesn't have much else. And so he's become such a focal point of the offense for Tampa as I don't know what they are anymore. Other than the fact that if they need offensive input, they're getting it from Nikita Kucherov. So, I see in the Canucks, I see more balanced scoring, and I don't see that balanced scoring in Tampa right now. Steven Stamkos is not as prolific as he once was. Braden Point isn't prolific like he once was. And it's, the Kucherov's shoulders are pretty wide to carry what they have to do right now. And there's a chance Tampa doesn't make the playoffs. There is a chance that Tampa does not make the playoffs. And I don't think anybody would have envisioned that with that kind of lineup.
Well, they've had to churn the roster through a little bit, right? I mean, this is the downside of a salary cap league in that, you get players to graduate on a quote unquote championship team, and then all of a sudden they can command a lot more money on the open market, and you can't afford it because of the salary cap.
That's right. When you look at Blake Coleman in Calgary, Ross Colton in Colorado, I saw Andre Palat play the other night for New Jersey. That's exactly what happens is some of those key support guys get too expensive. The big boys you can afford. You can afford Victor Hedman. You can afford Kucherov. I'm not sure you can afford Stamkos anymore, but that's another story for another day. But then you have to find a way to juggle all of these things and get younger players, more inexpensive players, and then at a certain point be forced to jettison them as well. And by the way, then it becomes the judgment. Then it becomes the judgment of the people in charge. You know, I wonder now in Tampa's situation, would they revisit the Tanner Jeannot trade with what they gave up for Tanner Jeannot and what Tanner Jeannot has done since coming from Nashville?
Or the JT Miller trade, for that matter.
What I will say, though, is hats off to Julian Brisebois and before him, Steve Yzerman and their staff, because they have done a magnificent job of keeping competitiveness at a pretty high level for a lot of years when a lot of other markets, including the one you're in, you know, has often been heard whining about, oh, just when you build a team, you got to disassemble it because of the salary cap.
It does make you wonder,
you know,
though.
There's fairness in that argument as well, but, you know, Tampa's been a bit of an antidote to all
that.
It
does make you wonder shelf life. You know, what is the shelf life of, you know, we don't call them dynasties anymore, but, you know, championship teams. What's the shelf life in Tampa? What's the shelf life? What was it in Chicago? What's the shelf life in Pittsburgh right now? Look what they're going through with what they've done. You know, and all three of those franchises have been tremendously successful, have multiple Stanley Cups, but Pittsburgh struggling. Look what Chicago's it was a disaster. It's hopefully on the upswing now. And can Tampa be how far behind can Tampa be if they aren't able to get that second tier of players that can compete at an elite level?
And the Leafs are an example of a team that didn't even win the cup and is still having to monitor that situation just a little bit because, well, they've been at the top of the league in the regular season for so long that eventually you have to churn that as well.
Exactly.
Jon Cooper's been there for 10 years, which is pretty unheard of in the National Hockey League. Would he have been fired at some point early if he wasn't in a U.S. market, do you think? Would the feet have been to the fire a little bit more closely?
No. And that's where Steve Yzerman's patience early on rang true. Remember, John came into a very tumultuous situation after Guy got fired. And
John Yzerman never wanted to fire
settle
Boucher.
things down.
He was pushed into firing Boucher by his players effectively and did not respond to that.
And then remember, then Cooper brought the triplets with him, Kucherov, Palat, and Johnson. And that was the beginning of because they had Stamkos and they had a few other good players, but they could never play together. And Cooper was able to bring some of his own influence with some of his younger guys, bring them together. You know, they went to the Stanley Cup final in 2015 against Chicago and then missed the playoffs the following year. But I think that there was a real understanding that Jon Cooper was a modern day coach and Jon Cooper could work through these things. And it certainly has paid off. Can you imagine being in the media in Florida when you have Paul Maurice and Jon Cooper as your two coaches?
Amazing. Two of the great communicators in the league. And I will say this, the Vancouver Canucks at some point in their history have to bring the lawyer from Prince George home. He will coach the Canucks one day. They will offer him bags of money. Jon Cooper.
To be honest,
he's got family here down in White Rock, if I'm not mistaken.
Here's the headline. Sekeres getting rid of Tocchet.
No. But I said one day.
Here's the thing: Tocchet doesn't have the championship pedigree as a head coach. As a head coach, you wonder that would line up nicely for the evolution of the Vancouver Canucks.
Rick Tocchet was a pretty good coach for those Pittsburgh Penguin teams.
Just wasn't the head.
Sullivan, you know?
Well, and speaking of, Sullivan gets the vote of confidence there from Dubas.
That's a fascinating. So I have a theory on that one. Penguins are coming to Toronto in the next 4 or 5 or 6 days. There's no way Kyle wants to do anything public in Toronto. There's no way he would do anything. So what you do is you have a press conference in Pittsburgh before you go on the road. And so Kyle had his press conference yesterday. And obviously, with the team struggling the way they're struggling, you have to be asked about Mike Sullivan. And I mean, Kyle. I mean, I wish he would have even said more. No, Mike Sullivan's the coach here as long as he wants to be the coach here. But
do you think Kyle is going to pick someone and do an interview in Toronto? Do you think Dubas is going to release it? Do you see that sort of flame fanning when the Penguins come to town?
I think Kyle will be stealth. I think Kyle will do nothing. For the record, I have talked to the Penguins 6 times. I view Kyle as not a friend, but as an acquaintance.
Mm-hmm.
I have my relationship with Kyle goes all the way back to his time in Sault Ste. Marie. I have requested him to come on our show 6 times, politely, and I have never. I think he's staying away from Canadian media. Period, and that's the way it is. The only exception would be, is that that he does Rogers nationally with Ron McLean if they request it. And I'm sure they have requested it, and they might have turned them down.
Does Rod Brindamore have a Jon Cooper-like leash? Players only meeting after the loss to the Canucks, 20 minutes long. Is that just them about trying to find themselves, not so much about them shutting out Rod Brindamore?
There is something missing in Carolina. We in watching them the last week or so, and watching them in Edmonton with the famous "we're going to lose 50-0" speech. There is something missing, and whether it's a disconnect between the players and the coach, or a disconnect between the coach and the manager, or there is something missing right now. Obviously, their goaltending is not what it should be. Remember, this was a team that was supposed to have the best defense in the National Hockey League, with Brady Shea and Brett Pesce and all these guys, Brett Burns, and all of a sudden they have the worst save percentage in the National Hockey League, and there is something not right in Carolina. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that, and I don't know what it is.
Mark my words, Shannon, there will come a day when we bring Rod the Bod from Campbell River, British Columbia, home to coach the Vancouver
He loves
Canucks.
the coaching connections to BC.
I do. Bring them all home.
There it is. Sekeres, fire talk and bring in Brindamore.
Fired twice today. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
But that whole division, talking about like coaches, communicators, that whole division even.
Talking's a good communicator, though.
No, Talking's a great communicator. We love Talking as communicator. But
there is no issue with Rick Tocchet, period.
No.
End of story.
No. Hey, Luongo, Ring of Honor night here Thursday. Where were you? Should they have retired his number, or is Ring of Honor appropriate enough for a player of Roberto's stature?
I would have retired the sweater. I would have retired it. I think that he's, people in BC don't like to hear too much about the Edmonton Oilers. I like what the Oilers rule is. The Oilers rule is you go in the Ring of Honor unless you are inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, at which point you then qualify to have your number retired. And so that's really logical. That's some common sense there. It began, Glenn Sather was the one who put the rule in place, and they've continued it well after Glenn left. So I would be retiring Roberto Luongo's number 1.
I don't think I'd heard that expressed before about the Oilers. Incidentally, John, the festivities around this, we've lived through some Ring of Honor ceremonies here in Vancouver. The festivities around this are not equal to the other ones that we have seen. It's sort of like we're all looking at each other going, this is a lot bigger than you normally go
it's
here.
Like a hybrid here.
Yeah, like this is a middle tier they've created here, because not all Ring of Honor ceremonies are clearly created equal.
No, but I think it speaks to perhaps somebody in the organization feeling that really he should be retired, but they hate to be backed into a corner.
They do.
And that's exactly, when it came out that it was going to be just the Ring of Honor and not a retired sweater, then that became a huge issue. And you can have, and there's going to be a vintage of Canuck fans saying, well, if you do that, you have to do Kirk McLean. That's not true.
No,
you don't have to do anything. I look at organizations that have retired sweaters, and the multiple guys have worn the sweater, and that's not a factor. I think Roberto deserves to have the number one in the rafters, and nobody wears one again.
And for a wisecracking goalie like Roberto Luongo, they had an out after they made the initial mistake of announcing it as a Ring of Honor. And Matt's probably sick and tired of me hearing this, probably the listeners too. They had an out. You surprise Roberto on the night, and you have everybody looking at the Ring of Honor, and then you shine the spotlight over to his jersey, and you surprise him, and you retire the jersey. It was there for them, but now they're releasing merchandise that says Ring of Honor, so that option is out the doors.
That said, I think at Rogers Arena, I think the Ring of Honor is the best one in the NHL.
It's a good one for sure because it's got the visage and everything. Yeah,
right. Yeah. I think they really dress it up nicely. So, and I don't want to dispel anybody that has their number retired. I like Stan Smeel his number 12 should be retired in Vancouver.
I was just going to say, John, I mean, on the Glenn Sather rule, Smeel and Linden are not retired here in town, which would be abhorrent for a lot of Canucks fans.
The other thing that's come up is the Ring of Honor is so good, John. I think it was Jeff Patterson that mentioned this. It actually looks better than the retired numbers because you get the whole picture. Like, is that not the better real estate in Rogers Arena?
That's my point about the way the display works, particularly the way that arena is constructed.
Yeah.
Secondly, you say people in Vancouver don't like to hear about the Oilers. Well, they really don't like to hear this part of it. They've had so many great players. They have to be more discerning.
Yes.
Correct.
Right.
Oh, no. That was the vision from the beginning, because Sather had so many influences from his time in Montreal. He wasn't there very long, but he understood, looking up to the rafters, that you had to make sure you had a certain credentials in order to get your number retired at the Old Forum and now at the Bell Center. And he brought those same rules and regulations to Edmonton, and it just made sense. I mean, look how long it took for Kevin Lowe to have his number 4 retired in that scenario, and they had to wait until he got into the Hall of Fame. Wow. And when you talk about non-Hall of Fame guys, there is one number in Edmonton Hall of Fame, and that's Al Hamilton, who was retired as a WHA player that they left up, and they've maintained their respect for Al Hamilton by having his number 3 retired. And so there are always exceptions. As long as you show respect and common sense, I think they could work it out.
Well, I'll do you one better. For the longest time in Montreal, there were 6 numbers retired.
Yeah.
Plante, Harvey, Lafleur, Richard, and Morenz. And I once asked Ken Dryden, I was like, Ken, how many Stanley Cups did you win? And he said, whatever it was, 6, 7. And I said, your number's not retired? And he's like, oh, it's a very high standard there, and I don't make the grade. Well, they have since relented, and they've put guys like Cournoyer and Dryden and Serge Savard and some of their other great players. Did I mention Beliveau? Beliveau was an original retired number as well. So they've had to adapt, if you will, John, to changing. The Boom Boom's up there now as well. So they've had to adapt to changing times when they wanted to draw the strictest, hardest line in the game at one point.
Well, and you're right about. By the way, Dryden, I think, won 6. That a lot of that came with time too, and I think that's the magic of what sports has. I mean, just because it doesn't happen today doesn't mean it can't happen one day.
That's fair.
And so there is that time element that's on everyone who thinks they deserve to be, or people think that a player deserves to be retired. They have that time.
Lastly, my friend, for anybody who worried about the physicality of the sport going away, It has been a hell of a week in body checks, or in some cases, dirty hits.
We need the stop signs back.
Honestly, do you have any theories as to why we're seeing these absolute collisions?
I end up talking to an NHL coach about this the other day, and he said you can feel behind the bench in the last 7 to 10 days the level of compete just starting to grow. And that people are now saying, okay, and forget about U.S. Thanksgiving and the numbers and the playoffs. Is everything's tightening up? There isn't, teams aren't losing 10-0 and 10-1 anymore. Everybody's competitive, and people are looking past the holidays now to say, oh, it's not that long until January and the playoff drive starts. We better get our act in gear. And people are just playing that much more physical. People are dialed in to play the game right now. And that's why we're seeing a lot more speed, and we're seeing a lot more play along the boards like we've seen with Evander Kane and Nick Cousins and Eric Robinson and Ross Colton. I mean, it's become a vicious circle. And then you get the stuff like David Perron and Anton Zub in the Ottawa-Detroit game. It is getting vicious.
I'm sure this is because the Canucks are just competitive for the first time in forever. But correct me, does it feel like this is the first normal year post-pandemic? It took us a few years to sort of
last
get back
year
on
was
our feet.
Normal, just not here.
No, I know, but but just even from an economic standpoint from the NHL, is this was last year the first normal year? Or do you feel like this one feels like the most normal year since the pandemic?
Last year was the normal year when you think of the cycle of when things happened and what happened. And you're right. I think that Vancouver was still out of the loop a little bit because of the way the team played and the it feels like forever ago that Bruce got fired. It's a different world.
We've lived 1,000 lives. Yeah.
Right.
Honestly.
Yeah. So last year was a normal year, maybe in 31 cities.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think there's something to be said that the Canucks have come back into the 32 team league and now it's normal. And there's a whole bunch of players. There's a whole bunch of players that the younger players like the Cole Perfettis of the world that have finally reached their potential because they lost a year and a half due to COVID, whether it be in junior hockey and the shortened season.
All right.
Yeah.
Last question. Do you get TVA Sports on your cable package, John Shannon?
I could, but I don't. I don't, but I don't.
All right. So will you be watching on Center Ice or Plus tonight, Connor versus Connor?
Boys, I am there live.
Oh my goodness.
To be John Shannon.
Honestly.
To be John Shannon.
I am there live. It's going to be, I'll tell you what, if we talk about compete levels, I guarantee you number 97, not number 98, he'll be good anyway. I guarantee you number 97 will be on the top of his game tonight.
Defending the crown, yes.
When we talked to Frank Corrado once about Sidney Crosby, he said you could tell that Sidney would roll through Montreal or Edmonton, one of the Canadian markets, or one of the big stars in the game across the way. Yeah. You could tell that Sidney would up his level, so I have no doubt McDavid will do the same. Enjoy the game. We'll need a full report next Tuesday.
Cheers, boys.
This clip brought to you by Betway. Must be 19 plus to play. Please play responsibly.